Traditions and Encounters by Bentley, by McGraw Hill. Chapter 12, The Resurgence of Empire in East Asia, Chapter 12. Eyewitness. Zhang, a young monk, hits the road. Early in the 7th century CE, the Emperor of China issued an order forbidding his subjects to travel beyond Chinese border into Asia. In 629, however, a young Buddhist monk slipped past imperial watchtowers, under cover of darkness, and made his way west. His name was Zhang, and his destination was India, homeland of Buddhism. As a young man, Zhang had followed his older brother into a monastery, where he became devoted to Buddhism. While studying in the Sanskrit language, Zhang noticed that Chinese writings on Buddhism contained many teachings that were confusing or even contradictory to those of Indian Buddhist text. He decided to travel to India, visit the holy sites of Buddhism, and study with the most knowledgeable Buddhist teachers and sages to learn about his faith from the purest sources. Zhang could not have imagined the difficulties he would face. Immediately after his departure from China, his guide abandoned him in the Gobi Desert. After losing his water bag and collapsing in the heat, Zhang made his way to the oasis town of Turpan on the Silk Roads. The Buddhist ruler of Turpan provided a devout pilgrim with travel supplies and rich gifts to support his mission. Among the presents were 24 letters of introduction to rulers of lands on the way to India, each one attached to a bolt of silk. 30 horses, 25 laborers, and 500 bolts of silk, along with gold, silver, and silk clothes for Zhang to use as travel funds. After departing from Turpan, Zhang crossed 3 of the world's highest mountain ranges in the Tian Shan, Hindu Kush, and Pamir ranges, and lost 1/3 of his party to exposure of starvation in the Tian Shan. Yet Zhang persisted and arrived in India in 630. He lived there for more than 12 years, devoting himself to the study of languages and Buddhist doctrine, especially Nalanda, the center of advanced Buddhist education in India. He also amassed a huge collection of relics and images, as well as some 657 books, all of which he transported back to China to advance the understanding of Buddhism in his native land. By the time of his return in 645, Zhang had logged more than 16,000 kilometers, 10,000 miles, on the road. News of the holy monk's efforts had reached the imperial court, and even though Zhang had violated the ban on travel, he received a hero's welcome and an audience with the emperor. Until his death in 664, Zhang translated Buddhist treatises into Chinese and promoted his faith. His efforts helped to popularize Buddhism and bring about nearly universal adoption of the faith throughout China. Zhang undertook his journey and propitious time for more than 350 years after the fall of the Han Dynasty. War, invasion, conquest, and foreign rule disrupted Chinese society. Toward the end of the 6th century, however, economic growth in China, especially in the areas of agriculture, yields, and technological innovations. As a result, China stood alongside the Byzantine and Abbasid empires as a political and economic anchor of the post-classical world. For China, the post-classical era was an age of intense interaction with other peoples. Chinese merchants participated in trade networks that linked most regions of the Eastern Hemisphere. Buddhism spread beyond its homeland of India and attracted a large popular following in China. A resurgent China also made its influence felt throughout East Asia, especially in Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. Although these lands retained their distinctiveness, each drew inspiration. Centralized imperial rule returned to China. The Tang dynasties restored order and presided over an era of rapid from China and participated in a large East Asian society centered on China. I probably read that really wrong, but I'm sorry. Here's the chronology. The restoration of centralized imperial rule in China. For several centuries following the Han Dynasty, none of the remaining regional kingdoms was able to assert lasting authority over all of China. In the late 6th century, however, Yingxing, an ambitious ruler in northern China, embarked on a series of military campaigns that brought all of China once again under centralized imperial rule. Yangxin Sui dynasty survived less than 30 years, but the tradition of centralized rule outlived his house. The Tang dynasty replaced the Sui, and the Song succeeded the Tang. The Tang and Song dynasties organized Chinese society so efficiently that China became a center of exceptional agricultural and industrial production, creating an economy so powerful that it affected much of the Eastern Hemisphere. The Sioux Dynasty. Establishment of the Sioux Dynasty, like Qin Shuangdi, I'm sorry if I mispronounced, some 8 centuries earlier, Yingxing imposed tight political discipline on his own state and then extended his rule to the rest of China. Yangxin began his rise to power when a Turkish ruler appointed him Duke of Sui in northern China. In 580, Yangxin patron died, and 1 year later he claimed both the throne and the mandate of heaven for himself. During the next decade, Yangxin sent military expeditions to Central Asia and southern China. By 589, the House of Sioux ruled all of China. Like the rulers of the Qin dynasty, the emperors of the Sioux dynasty, 589 to 618 CE, built a strong centralized government, but only a great human and financial cost. Indeed, the Sioux emperors ordered construction projects, repaired defensive walls, and conducted military campaigns, but did so by levying high taxes and demanding compulsory labor services from their subjects. The Grand Canal. The most elaborate projects undertaken during the Sioux Dynasty was the construction of the Grand Canal, which was one of the largest waterwork projects before modern times. The second emperor, Sioux Yangdi, reigned 604 to 618, wanted the canal to facilitate trade between northern and southern China, particularly to make the abundant supplies of rice and other food crops from the Yangtze River Valley available to residents of northern regions. Since Chinese rivers generally flow from west to east, only an artificial waterway could support such a large volume of bulky goods trade between north and south. The Grand Canal was a series of artificial waterways that ultimately reached from Hangzhou in the south to the imperial capital of Chang and in the west to a terminus near modern Beijing in the north. Sioux Yangdi used canals dug as early as the Zhou Dynasty, but he linked them to a network that served much of China. When completed, the Grand Canal extended almost 2,000 kilometers, 1,240 miles, and reportedly was 40 paces wide, with roads running parallel to it on either side. Though expensive to construct, Sioux Yangdi's investment in the Grand Canal paid enormous dividends for the future. It integrated the economies of northern and southern China, thereby establishing an economic foundation for political and cultural unity. Until the arrival of railroads in the 20th century, the Grand Canal served as the principal conduit for international trade. Indeed, the canal continues to function even today. Su Yangdi's construction projects served China well for a long time, but their dependence on high taxes and forced labor generated hostility toward his rule. The Grand Canal alone required the service of conscripted laborers by the millions. In the late 610s, discontented subjects began to revolt against Sioux rule. In 618, a disgruntled minister assassinated the emperor and brought the dynasty to an end. The Tang Dynasty. Soon after Su Yangdi's death, a rebel leader seized Chang'an and proclaimed himself emperor of a new dynasty that he named Tang after his hereditary title. The dynasty survived for almost 300 years, 618 to 907 CE, and Tang rulers organized China into a powerful, productive, and prosperous society. The Tang Tizong. Much of the Tang success was due to the energy, ability, and policies of the dynasty's second emperor. Tang Tizong reigned 627 to 649 CE. Taizong was both ambitious and ruthless. In making his way to the imperial throne, he murdered 2 of his brothers and pushed his father aside. Once on the throne, however, he displayed a high sense of duty and strove conscientiously to provide an effective, stable government. He built a splendid capital at Chang'an, and he saw himself as a Confucian ruler who needed the interest of his subjects. Contemporaries reported the banditry ended during his reign, that the price of rice remained low, and that taxes levied on peasants amounted to only 1/40th of the annual harvest, a 2.5% tax rate. These reports suggest that China enjoyed an era of unusual stability and prosperity during the reign of Tang Tizong. 3 policies in particular helped to explain the success of the early Tang dynasty: maintenance of a well-articulated transportation and communications network, distribution of land according to the principles of the equal field system, and reliance on bureaucracy based on merit. All 3 policies originated in the Sioux Dynasty, but Tang rulers applied them more systematically and effectively in their predecessors. Here is the map, so you can kind of see what's going on. See if I can, hopefully you can still kind of see that. Transportation and communications. Apart from the Grand Canal, which served as the principal route for long-distance transportation with China, Tang rulers maintained an extensive network of roads along the main routes. Tang officials maintained inns, postal stations, and stables using couriers traveling by horse. The Tang court could communicate with the most distant cities in the empire in about 8 days. Even human runners provided speedy services. Relay teams of some 9,600 runners supplied the Tang court at the Chang'an with fresh seafood from Ningbo, more than 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles away. The equal field system. The equal field system governed the allocation of agricultural land. Its purpose was to ensure an equitable distribution of land to avoid the concentration of landed property that had caused social problems during the Han Dynasty. The system allotted land to individuals and their families according to the land's fertility and the recipient's needs. About 1/5 of the land became the hereditary possession of the recipients, and the rest remained available for the redistribution when the original recipients' needs and circumstances changed. For about a century, administrators were able to apply the principles of the equal field system relatively consistently. By the early 8th century, however, a rapidly rising population brought pressure on the land available for distribution. Meanwhile, influential families found ways to retain land scheduled for redistribution. Furthermore, large parcels of land fell out of the system altogether when Buddhist monasteries acquired them. Nevertheless, during the first half of the Tang Dynasty, the system provided a foundation for stability and prosperity in the Chinese countryside. Bureaucracy of merit. The Tang Dynasty also relied heavily on a bureaucracy based on merit. Following the example of the Han Dynasty, Sioux and Tang rulers recruited government officials from the ranks of candidates who had progressed through the Confucian educational system. Based on the classic works of Chinese literature and philosophy, as a result, most office holders won their posts because of intellectual ability. Members of his talented class were generally loyal to the dynasty, and they worked to preserve and strengthen the state. In fact, the Confucian educational system and the related civil service served Chinese government so well that with modifications and an occasional interruption, they survived until the collapse of the Qing dynasty. In the early 20th century, military expansion. Soon after its foundation, the powerful and dynamic Tang state began to flex its military muscles. In the north, Tang forces brought Manchuria under imperial authority and forced the Xia kingdom in Korea to acknowledge the Tang emperor as overlord. To the south, Tang armies conquered the northern part of Vietnam. To the west, they extended Tang authority almost as far as the Aral Sea and brought a portion of the high plateau of Tibet under Tang control. Territorially, the Tang Empire ranks among the largest in Chinese history. Tang foreign relations. In an effort to fashion a stable diplomatic order, the Tang emperors revived the Han dynasty's practice of tribute system. According to the Chinese political theory, China was the middle kingdom and had the responsibility of bringing order to subordinate lands through a system of tributary relationships. Neighboring lands and peoples would recognize Chinese emperors as their overlords, and envoys from those states would regularly deliver gifts to the court of the Middle Kingdom and perform the kowtow, a ritual prostration during which subordinates knelt before the emperor and touched their foreheads to the ground. In return, tributary states received confirmation of their authority as well as lavish gifts. Because Chinese authorities often had little influence in these supposedly subordinate lands, there was always something of a fictional quality to the system. Nevertheless, it was extremely important because it institutionalized relations between China and neighboring lands, fostering trade and cultural exchanges as well as diplomatic contacts. Here's a picture of this. So you can see how the Grand Canal. And then here's a picture of the map. Okay. Tang decline. Under able rulers such as the Taizong, the Tang dynasty flourished during the mid-8th century. Nevertheless, the careless leadership of an emperor more interested in music and his favorite concubine brought the dynasty to a crisis. In 755, one of the dynasty's foremost military commanders, and Lushan, mounted a rebellion and captured the capital at Chang'an and the secondary capital of Luoyang. His revolt was short-lived. By 763, Tang forces had suppressed and Lushan's army and recovered their capitals, but the rebellion left the dynasty gravely weakened because Tang commanders had to ask a nomadic Turkish people, the Uyghurs, to help them win back their capitals. In return, the Uyghurs demanded the right to sack Chang'an and Luoyang after the expulsion of the rebels. The Tang imperial house never again regained control of affairs. The equal field system deteriorated and tax receipts dwindled. Imperial armies were unable to resist invasions of Turkish peoples in the late 8th century. During the 9th century, a series of rebellions devastated the Chinese countryside. In an effort to control rebellions, the Tang emperors granted the progressively greater power and authority to regional military commanders, who gradually became the effective rulers of China. In 907, the last Tang emperor abdicated his throne, and the dynasty came to an end. The Song dynasty. Following the Tang collapse, warlords ruled China until the Song dynasty reimposed centralized imperial rule in the late century. Though it survived for more than 3 centuries, the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE, never built a very powerful state. Song rulers mistrusted military leaders, and they placed much more emphasis on civil administration, industry, education, and the arts on the military affairs. Song Taizu. The first Song emperor, Song Taizu, reigned 960 to 976 CE. Inaugurated this policy, Song Taizu began his career as a junior military officer for a powerful warlord in northern China. He had a reputation for honesty and effectiveness, and in 960, his troops proclaimed him emperor. During the next several years, he and his army subjected the warlords to their authority and consolidated Song control throughout China. He then set about organizing a centralized administration that placed military forces under tight supervision. Song rulers vastly expanded the bureaucracy by creating more opportunities for individuals to seek Confucian education and take civil service examinations. They accepted many more candidates into bureaucracy than their Sioux and Tang predecessors, and they provided generous salaries for those who qualified for government appointments. They even placed civil bureaucrats in charge of military forces. Song weakness. The Song approach to administration resulted in a more centralized imperial government than earlier Chinese dynasties had enjoyed, but it caused 2 big problems that eventually caused the dynasty to fall. The first problem was financial. As the number of bureaucrats and the size of their rewards grew, the imperial treasury came under tremendous pressure. That pressure in turn aggravated the peasantry, who were expected to shoulder increased taxes. The second problem was military. Scholar bureaucrats generally had little talent for military affairs, yet they led Song armies in the field and made military decisions. It was no coincidence that nomadic peoples flourished along China's northern border throughout the Song dynasty in the early 12th century. The nomadic Jurchen overran northern China, captured the Song capital at Kaifeng, and proclaimed establishment of the Jin Empire. Thereafter, the Song dynasty moved its capital to the prosperous port city of Hangzhou, and survived only in southern China. So the latter part of the dynasty is commonly known as the Southern Song. This translated Southern Song shared a border with the Jin Empire about midway between the Yellow River and the Yangtze River until 1279, when Mongol forces ended the dynasty altogether. The economic development of Tang and Song Dynasty, or Song China. Although Song Dynasty did not develop a strong military capacity, it benefited from a remarkable series of agricultural, technological, industrial, and commercial developments. This economic development originated in the Tang Dynasty, but its results became most clear during the Song, which presided over the land of enormous prosperity. The economic surge of Tang and Song times had implications that went well beyond China, since it stimulated trade and production throughout much of the Eastern Hemisphere. For more than half a millennium, from about 600 to 1300 CE, agricultural development, fast ripening rice. The foundation of economic development in Tang and Song China was a surge in agricultural production. When Sioux and Tang armies ventured into Vietnam, they encountered new strains of fast ripening rice that enabled cultivators to harvest 2 crops per year. Transferred to the fertile fields of southern China, fast ripening rice quickly resulted in an expanded supply of food. New agricultural techniques. Chinese cultivators also increased their productivity by adopting improved agricultural techniques. They made increased use of heavy iron plows, and they harnessed oxen in the north and water buffaloes in the south to help prepare the land for cultivation. They enriched the soil with manure and composted organic matter. They also organized extensive irrigation systems. Artificial irrigation made it possible to extend cultivation to new lands, including terraced mountainsides, a development that vastly expanded China's agricultural potential. Here's the picture. Here's thinking about it. Thinking about traditions. Population growth. Increased agricultural production resulted in rapid population growth. After the fall of the Han Dynasty, the population of China reached a low point of about 45 million in 600 CE. By 100 CE, it had increased to 60 million. By 1127, when the Jurchen conquered the northern half of the Song state, the Chinese population had passed the 100 million mark, and by 1200 it stood at about 115 million. Urbanization, increased food supplies, encouraged the growth of cities. During the Tang Dynasty, the imperial capital of Chang'an was the world's most populous city, with as many as 2 million residents. During the Song Dynasty, China was the most urbanized land in the world. In the late 13th century, Hangzhou, capital of the southern Song Dynasty, had more than 1 million residents. They supported hundreds of restaurants, taverns, tea houses, brothels, music halls, theaters, clubhouses, gardens, markets, craft shops, and specialty stores dealing in silk, gems, porcelain, lacquerware, and other goods. Another result of the increased food production was the emergence of a commercialized agricultural economy. Because fast ripening rice yielded bountiful harvests, many cultivators could purchase inexpensive rice and raise vegetables and fruits for sale on the commercial market. Cultivators specialized in crops that grew well in their own regions, and they often exported their harvest to distant regions. By the 12th century, for example, the wealthy southern province of Fujian imported rice and devoted its land to the production of lychees, oranges, and sugarcane, which fetched high prices in the northern markets. Patriarchal structures. Alongside increasing wealth and agricultural productivity, Tang, excuse me, and especially Song China experienced a tightening of patriarchal social structures. During the Song Dynasty, for example, the veneration of family ancestors became much more elaborate than before. Indeed, descendants diligently sought the graves of their earliest traceable forefathers and then arranged elaborate graveside rituals in their honor. Whole extended families often traveled great distances to attend annual rituals. Venerating deceased ancestors, a practice that strengthened the sense of family identity and cohesiveness. Foot binding. Strengthened patriarchal authority also helps to explain the popularity of foot binding, which spread among privileged classes during the Song era. Foot binding involved a tight wrapping of young girls' feet with strips of cloth which prevented natural growth and resulted in tiny malformed curved feet. Women with their bound feet could not walk easily or naturally. Usually they needed canes to walk by themselves, and sometimes they depended on servants to carry them around in litters. Foot binding never became universal in China. It was impractical for peasants or lower-class working women in the cities, but wealthy families often bound the feet of their daughters to enhance their attractiveness, display their high social standing, and gain increased control over the girl's behavior. Like the practice of veiling women in the Islamic world, foot binding placed women of privileged classes under tight supervision of their male guardians, who then managed the woman's affairs in the interest of the larger family. Woozhou, the Lady Emperor. Ironically, this era of strong patriarchal authority produced a rare female ruler. Woozhou, 626 to 706, also known as Wuxi Zixin, was the daughter of a scholar official. At the age of 13, she became a concubine at the court of Tang Tizong, where she attracted notice because of her intelligence, wit, and beauty. After Taizong's death, Woozhou became the concubine and later the wife of his successor. In 660, the emperor suffered a debilitating stroke, and Woozhou seized the opportunity to direct affairs as administrator of the court. In 690, she went further and claimed the imperial title for herself. Confucian principles held that political leadership was a man's duty and that women should obey their fathers, husbands, and sons. Thus, it was not surprising that factions emerged to oppose Woozhou's rule. The Lady Emperor, however, was resourceful in garnering support. She organized a secret police force to monitor dissident factions, and she ordered brutal punishment for those who stood in her way. She strengthened her civil service system as a way of undercutting aristocratic families that might attempt to displace her. She also generously patronized Buddhists, who returned the favor by composing treatises, seeking to legitimize her rule. Although Confucian scholars reviled her, Woozhou was an energetic and effective ruler. She quashed the rebellions, organized military campaigns, and opened the imperial administration to talented commoners who rose through civil service system. She held on to her rule until age 80, when opponents finally able to force her to abdicate in favor of her son. Yet the Lady Emperor was unique as a woman who publicly and officially wielded the power in a rigidly patriarchal society. Other women exercised influence indirectly or even ruled from behind a screen. But Woozhou was the only woman in Chinese history to claim the imperial title and rule as emperor. Porcelain, technological and industrial development. Here is the picture here. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry about that. Let me... Song era. Technological and industrial development. Sorry about that, guys. Porcelain. Abundant supplies of food enabled many people to pursue technological and industrial interest. During the Tang and Song dynasties, Chinese craft workers generated a remarkable range of technological innovations. During Tang times, they discovered techniques for producing a high-quality porcelain, which was lighter, thinner, and adaptable to more uses than earlier pottery. Porcelain technology gradually diffused to other societies, yet demand for Chinese porcelain remained high, and the Chinese exported vast quantities of porcelain during the Tang and Song dynasties. Indeed, Chinese porcelain graced the tables of wealthy and refined households in Southeast Asia, India, Persia, and the port cities of East Africa. Tang and Song products gained such a reputation that fine porcelain has come to be known generally as Chinaware. Metallurgy. Tang and Song craftsmen also improved metallurgical technologies, which resulted in a surge of iron and steel production. Chinese craftsmen discovered that they could use coke instead of coal in their furnaces and produce stronger and more useful grades of metal. Between the early 9th and early 12th centuries, iron production increased almost tenfold. According to official records, most of the increased supply of iron and steel went into weaponry and agricultural tools. During the early Song dynasties, imperial armaments manufacturers produced 16.5 million airheads per year. As in the case of porcelain technology, metallurgical techniques soon diffused to lands beyond China. Indeed, Song military difficulties stemmed partly from the fact that nomadic peoples quickly learned Chinese techniques and fashioned their own iron weapons for use in campaigns against them. Gunpowder. Tang and Song craftsmen also invented entirely new products, tools, and techniques, most notably gunpowder, printing, and naval technologies. During the Tang dynasty, Taoist alchemists seeking elixirs to prolong life soon learned that it was unwise to mix charcoal, saltpeter, sulfur, and arsenic because of the volatility of the resulting compound. Military officials, however, recognized opportunity in the explosive mixture. By the mid-10th century, they were using gunpowder in bamboo fire lances, a kind of flamethrower, and by the 11th century, they had fashioned primitive bombs. The earliest gunpowder weapon had limited military effectiveness. Over time, refinements enhanced their capabilities. Knowledge of the gunpowder chemistry quickly diffused through Eurasia, and by the late 13th century, peoples of the Southwest Asia and Europe were experimenting with metal-barreled cannons. Printing. The precise origins of printing are obscure. It is clear, however, that it became common during the Tang era. The earliest printers employed block printing techniques. They carved a reverse image of an entire page into a wooden block, inked the block, and then pressed a sheet of paper on top. By the mid-11th century, printers had also begun to experiment with reusable movable type instead of carving images into blocks. They fashioned dies in the shape of ideographs arranged them in a frame, inked them, and pressed the frame over paper sheets. Printing made it possible to produce text quickly, cheaply, and in huge quantities. By the late 9th century, printed copies of Buddhist texts, Confucian works, calendars, agricultural treatises, I can't say that, and popular works were abundant, particularly in southwestern China, modern Sichuan province. Naval technology. Chinese inventiveness extended also to naval technology before Tang times. Chinese mariners did not venture very far from land, relying instead on foreign ships for long distance. Maritime trade during the Tang Dynasty, however, Chinese consumers developed a taste for the spices and exotic products of Southeast Asian islands, and Chinese mariners increasingly visited those lands in their own ships. By the time of the Song Dynasty, Chinese seafarers sailed ships fastened with iron nails, waterproofed with oils, furnished with watertight bulkheads, driven by canvas and bamboo sails, steered by rudders, and navigated with the aid of the south-pointing needle. The magnetic compass, Chinese ships mostly plied the waters between Japan and the Malay Peninsula, but some of them called at ports in India, Ceylon, Persia, and East Africa. These long-distance travels helped to diffuse elements of Chinese naval technology, particularly the compass, which soon became a common property of mariners throughout the Indian Ocean basin. The emergence of a market economy, increased agricultural production, improved transportation system, population growth, urbanization, and the industrial production combined to stimulate the Chinese economy. Chinese various regions increasingly specialized in the cultivation of particular food crops or the production of particular manufactured goods. To be sure, the government played an important role in the Chinese economy by regulating the distribution of staple foods and the production of military-sensitive enterprises, such as the iron industry. Nevertheless, millions of cultivators produced fruits and vegetables for sale on the open market, and manufacturers of silk, porcelain, and other goods supplied both domestic and foreign markets. The Chinese economy became more tightly integrated than ever before, and foreign demand for Chinese products fueled rapid economic expansion. Financial instruments. Oh boy, it's getting old. In fact, trade grew so rapidly during Tang and Song times that China experienced a shortage of copper coins that served as money for most transactions. To alleviate the shortage, letters of credit came into common use during the early Tang Dynasty. Later developments included the use of promissory notes, checks, and even paper money. Indeed, wealthy merchants pioneered the use of printed paper money in the late 9th century in return for cash deposits from their clients. They issued printed notes that the clients could redeem for merchandise. In a society short of cash, these notes greatly facilitated commercial transactions, yet they also caused a lot of disorder and sometimes even riots in the event that merchants were not able to honor their notes. In the 11th century, in an effort to forestall such disorder, the Chinese government stepped in and assumed the sole right to issue paper money. The first government issued paper money appeared in 1024 in the Sichuan province, and by the end of the 11th century, it existed throughout imperial China, in spite of continuing problems with paper currency, including counterfeit notes and lapses of public confidence in the government's ability to honor its own notes. Printed paper money provided a powerful stimulus to the Chinese economy under the Song. A cosmopolitan society, Trade and urbanization transformed Tang and Song into a prosperous cosmopolitan society. Trade came to China both by land and by sea. Muslim merchants and the Abbasid Empire in Central Asia, and even subjects of the Byzantine Empire, helped to revive the Silk Roads network and flocked to large Chinese trading centers. Residents of large Chinese cities such as Chang'an and Luoyang became quite accustomed to merchants from foreign lands. Indeed, musicians and dancers from Persia became popular entertainers in the cities of the Tang Dynasty. Meanwhile, Arab, Persian, Indian, and Malay mariners arriving by the way of the Indian Ocean and South China Sea established sizable merchant communities in the bustling southern Chinese port cities of the Guangzhou and the Qingzhou. Here's the Guangzhou, Changzhou. Anyway, that's how you pronounce it. Here's sources of the past. I'll let you pause. There you go. If I stop moving, I'm sorry about that. China and the hemispheric economy. Indeed, a high productivity and trade brought the Tang and Song economy a dynamism that China's borders could not restrain. Chinese consumers developed a taste for the exotic goods, which stimulated trade throughout much of the Eastern Hemisphere. Spices from the islands of Southeast Asia made their way to China, along with the products of as diverse as kingfisher feathers and tortoiseshell from Vietnam, pearls and incense from India, and horses and melons from Central Asia. In exchange for exotic items, China sent abroad vast quantities of silk, porcelain, and lacquerware in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, India, Persia, and the port cities of East Africa. Wealthy merchants and rulers wore Chinese silk and set their tables with Chinese porcelain. China's economic surge during the Tang and Song dynasties thus promoted trade and economic growth throughout much of the Eastern Hemisphere. Cultural change and Tang and Song China. Interactions with peoples of other societies encouraged cultural change in post-classical China. The Confucian and Taoist traditions did not disappear, but they made way for a foreign religion, Mayan Buddhism, and they developed along new lines that reflected the conditions of Tang and Song society. The establishment of Buddhism. Foreign religions in China. Buddhist merchants traveling the ancient Silk Roads visited China as early as the 2nd century BCE. During the Han Dynasty, their faith attracted little interest. Confucianism, Taoism, and cults that honored family ancestors were the most popular cultural alternatives during the unsettled centuries following the fall of the Han. However, several foreign religions, including Nestorian Christianity, Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, and Islam, established communities in China. Yet these religions of salvation mostly served the needs of foreign merchants trading in China and converts from nomadic societies, and did not win a large popular following. Here is the reverberations. I'll try and focus in on that so you can read that. Pause it and read it at your leisure. Deng Hong. Mayan Buddhism was different in that it gradually found a popular following in Tang and Song China. Buddhism came to China over the Silk Road via the oasis cities of Central Asia, and by the 4th century CE, a sizable Buddhist community had emerged at Dunhuang in western China, modern Gansu province. Between about 600 and 1000 CE, Buddhists built hundreds of cave temples in the vicinity of the Dunhuang and decorated them with murals depicting events in the lives of Buddha and the Bodhisattvas. They also assembled libraries of religious literature and operated scriptoria to produce Buddhist texts. Missions supported by establishments such as those at Dunhuang helped Buddhism to establish a foothold in China. Buddhism in China. Buddhism attracted Chinese interest partly because of its high standards of morality, its intellectual sophistication, and its promise of salvation. Yet practical concerns also helped to account for its appeal. Buddhist monastic communities in China accumulated sizable estates donated by wealthy converts, and they commonly stored a portion of their harvest for distribution among local residents during hard times. As a result, Buddhist monasteries became important elements in the local economies of Chinese communities. Here's the Cosmopolitan Society. Okay. Buddhism and Taoism. In some ways, Buddhism posed a challenge to Chinese cultural and social traditions. Buddhist theologians typically placed great emphasis on written texts and used them to explore elaborate investigations into the metaphysical themes, such as the nature of the soul. Among Chinese intellectuals, however, only the Confucian placed equal emphasis on written texts, and they devoted their energies mostly to practical rather than metaphysical issues. Meanwhile, Taoists had limited interest in written texts of any kind. Buddhist morality also called for individuals to observe an ascetic ideal by following a celibate monastic lifestyle. In contrast, the Chinese morality centered on the family unit and strongly encouraged procreation so that generations of the offspring would be available to venerate family ancestors. Some Chinese held that Buddhist monasteries were economically harmful because they paid no taxes, whereas scorned Buddhism because of its foreign origins. Because of the differences in concerns, Buddhist missionaries sought to tailor their message to Chinese audiences. They explained Buddhist concepts in vocabulary borrowed from Chinese cultural traditions, particularly Taoism. They translated the Indian term Dharma, the basic Buddhist doctrine, as Tao, the way, in the Taoist sense of the term, and they translated the Indian term Nirvana, personal salvation that comes after an individual soul escapes from the cycle of incarnation, as Wu Wei, the Taoist ethic of non-competition. While encouraging the establishment of monasteries and the observance of celibacy, they also recognized the validity of family life and offer Buddhism as a religion that would benefit the extended Chinese family. One son in the monastery they taught would bring salvation for 10 generations of kin. Here's Nirvana. Wu Wei. Thought I pronounced it right. Sorry. Chan Buddhism, the result as a syncretic faith, a Buddhism with Chinese characteristics. One of the more popular schools of Buddhism in China, for example, was the Chan, also known by its Japanese name Zen. Chan Buddhists had little interest in written text, but instead emphasized sudden flashes of insight in their search for spiritual enlightenment. In that respect, they resembled Taoists as much as they did Buddhist. During the Tang and Sioux dynasties, this syncretic Buddhism became an immensely popular and influential faith in China. Monasteries appeared in all major cities, and stupas dotted the Chinese landscape. The monk Xunzhang, 602 to 664, was only one of many devout pilgrims who traveled to India to visit holy sites and learn about Buddhism in its homeland. Like Xunzhang, many of those pilgrims returned with copies of treatises that deepened the understanding of Buddhism in China. In the process, they played significant roles in establishing Buddhism as a popular faith in China. Hostility to Buddhism in spite of its popularity. Buddhism met determined resistance from Taoists and Confucians. Taoists resented the popular following of Buddhism, which resulted in diminished resources available for their own tradition. Confucian despised Buddhist exaltation of celibacy, and they denounced the faith as an alien superstition. Persecution. During the late Tang Dynasty, Taoist and Confucian critics of Buddhism found allies in the imperial court. Beginning in the 840s, the Tang emperors ordered the closure of monasteries and the expulsion of Buddhists, as well as Zoroastrians, Nestorians, Christians, and Mancheans? I believe it's Mancheans. I'm so sorry. Yet Tang rulers did not implement the policy in a thorough way. The foreign faiths were not eradicated. Buddhism in a particular enjoyed continued support that enabled it not only to survive, but also to influence the development of Confucianism during the Song Dynasty. Neo-Confucianism. The Song emperors did not persecute Buddhists, but they actively supported native Chinese cultural traditions in hopes of limiting the influence of foreign religions. They contributed particularly generously to the Confucian tradition by sponsoring the studies of Confucian scholars and subsidizing the printing of dissemination of Confucian writings. Confucians and Buddhism. Yet Confucian tradition of the Song Dynasty differed from that of the earlier times. The earliest Confucians had concentrated resolutely on, I cannot pronounce today, I'm so sorry, practical issues of politics and morality. Since they were mainly concerned with establishing social order, Confucians and of the Song dynasties studied the classic works of their tradition, but they also were inspired by many aspects of Buddhist thought. Indeed, Buddhism offered a tradition of logical thought and argumentation that dealt with issues and not systematically explored by Confucian thinkers, such as the nature of the soul. Because Confucian thought during the Song dynasty reflected the influence of Buddhism as well as original Confucian values, it has come to be known as Neo-Confucianism. Neo-Confucian influence. Neo-Confucianism ranks as an important cultural development for two reasons. First, it illustrates the deep influence of Buddhism in Chinese culture or Chinese society. Even though Neo-Confucianism, Confucians reject Buddhism as a faith, their writings adapted Buddhist themes and reasoning to Confucian interests and values. Second, Neo-Confucianism influenced East Asian thought over a very long term. In China, Neo-Confucianism enjoyed the status of an officially recognized creed from the Song dynasty until the early 20th century, and in lands that fell within China's cultural orbit, particularly Korea, Vietnam, and Japan, Neo-Confucianism shaped philosophical, political, and moral thought for half a millennium and more. This is the end of chapter 12, part 1.